This is Norway, located on top of the Northern Sea and sharing borders with Sweden, Finland, and Russia. It is the world's 5th richest country. Norway is so wealthy that 25% of its population are millionaires. It is the world's 7th healthiest country and the most democratic country in the world. Norway tops all the indicators that are used to measure the prosperity of any country. But Norway wasn't always like this. In late 18th century, when famous economist Thomas Malthus visited snow-covered Norway, he saw a country whose people were extremely poor and desperate. A mountainous country where travel was almost impossible. Towns were distant and disconnected, the citizens were mostly uneducated, and the weather was extremely cold, which meant that agriculture was almost impossible, and people barely survived. Just a few years after Thomas left Norway, the condition of Norway deteriorated. Norway's economy completely collapsed. Famine spread throughout the country, and it seemed that poverty was now Norway's perpetual destiny. So how did such a massive transformation occur? How did Norway become such a developed and wealthy country? Let's find the answer to this question in this video. These are all the countries that possess 85% of the world's total oil reserves: Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, UAE, Libya, Russia, and Venezuela, but their combined GDP is only 8% of the world's GDP, and none of these countries are in the list of the world's top 10 richest countries. On the other hand, Norway is the 13th largest oil-producing country in the world, yet in terms of quality of life, it is ranked 4th. So what is the reason that despite producing so much oil, these countries are nowhere close to Norway in terms of standard of living? The reason is a phenomenon that economists call the oil curse. The problem with oil is that it is just like winning a lottery. After discovering oil, the country becomes rich overnight, but instead of using the money properly, the rulers of those countries reduce taxes to gain favor from their people. The oil industry overshadows other industries of that country. As these countries export oil, the demand for their local currency increases, making it easier for the citizens of that country to buy imported goods, and as a result, the local industry starts to suffer. As local companies start to shut down, unemployment in the country begins to rise. The wealth gets concentrated in the hands of a few people, and the common people start to get angry, and this anger leads to protests and eventually to bloody revolt. This is what happened in Libya and Venezuela. But why didn't this oil curse affect Norway? In the 19th century, Norway's entire economy was driven by sea trade. Norway had an extremely favorable coastline through which timber, fish, and various minerals were shipped to European and Asian countries via ships. At that time, Norway had the 4th largest sea fleet in the world, which allowed it to control nearly 30% of the sea trade in the Northern Sea. Along with this, the most significant step that Norway took was to establish a parliamentary system. The primary purpose of this system was to ensure that political power and wealth does not concentrate into the hands of a single person or a political party. Norway was also naturally favored with the potential for cheap hydroelectric power generation. However, at that time, 75% of Norway's hydropower generation companies were owned by foreigners, and this situation was a major concern for the Norwegian government. In 1940, the Norwegian government finally decided that Norway's natural resources would be owned only by Norwegians and passed a bill that prohibited foreign companies from owning hydropower projects of Norway, and during the same time the introduction of modern railways, roads, and transportation infrastructure gave a much-needed boost to Norway's local industry. Between 1945 to 1970, Norway's GDP growth was 3.3%. Norway had the highest taxes in the world, but a large portion of these taxes was spent by the government on education, public welfare, and supporting local industry. By 1965, unemployment in Norway was almost non-existent. Norway had now caught up with the rest of Europe, but it was still not at the level that it is at today. However, all of this was finally about to change. In 1959, natural gas reserves were discovered in Netherlands, and during this time, experts began to speculate that there might be oil reserves beneath the Northern Sea as well. In 1966, a company named Phillips Petroleum started drilling in the Northern Sea in search of oil, but despite drilling for almost 2 years, no oil reserves were discovered, and everyone became disappointed. Phillips Petroleum decided to make one last attempt, and this time, They went deep. Finally, in 1969, large oil reserves were discovered beneath North Sea. In the next 10 years, Norway's oil production became greater than that of any other country in the world. The oil sector started creating thousands of jobs. Fishing towns were now turning into petroleum powerhouses. Billions of dollars were coming in, and Norway's fate finally changed. But this also happened with the Middle Eastern countries. So what did Norway do differently? The Norwegian government had already passed a bill that ensured no single party or person would have control over natural resources, and all income generated from them would be spent solely on public welfare. All profits from oil were invested in infrastructure and education. Norway could have reduced taxes like the UAE and Saudi Arabia, but it did not. Instead, it collected taxes and reinvested them back into the people. Secondly, to promote other sectors of the country, the Norwegian government established a pension fund in 1990 with the sole purpose of investing in companies outside the oil sector in Norway. The biggest benefit of this was that Norway's other local industries also began to flourish. As a result, unemployment decreased further. Norway's dependence on the oil sector gradually diminished. Norway became a leading exporter of timber, paper, metals, and other minerals, and it soon made it to the list of world's most developed countries. Now many other countries also have the same natural resources as Norway, but they have not been able to replicate Norway's success. The difference lies in real democracy, long-term planning, and being sincere with their people. If we talk about South America, it is much more resource-rich than Norway, but due to political instability, short-term planning, and corruption, this resource-rich continent has fallen behind the rest of the world. It's high time that the people of South America realize the potential of their countries. They should take advantage of the almost perfect geography that God has given them and make South America one of the greatest continents in the world. If you liked this video, please follow our account because we have many more interesting videos coming up. See you in the next video.